Here is the most uncomfortable thought you will ever sit with. If something created everything, then what created that something? And if the answer is nothing created it, it always existed, then why couldn't the universe itself always have existed? You see, the moment you introduce a creator to explain existence, you haven't solved the mystery. You've just moved it one step back. And that one step, that single logical move, unravels everything. Stay with me, because this goes much deeper than you think. Let's start somewhere you've been before. You're a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and you're lying on the grass, staring up at the night sky. The stars are endless. The darkness between them feels thick, almost physical, and your mind, young and unfiltered, asks the question that every human being has asked since the first one looked up. Where did all of this come from? Your parents might have said, God made it. Your teacher might have said, the Big Bang. Your grandmother might have lit a candle and whispered a prayer. But notice something remarkable. Every single answer, no matter the culture, no matter the century, no matter the religion or the science, every answer eventually hits the same wall. But where did that come from? This is not a trick. This is not philosophy being difficult for the sake of it. This is the most honest question a human mind can ask, because causality, the idea that everything has a cause, is the very foundation of how we understand reality. Every time something happens, something else made it happen. A ball rolls because you kicked it. Rain falls because clouds formed. Clouds formed because water evaporated. Water evaporated because the sun heated it. Cause, effect, effect all the way back. Now most people, when they follow that chain long enough, feel a kind of vertigo. The mind reaches for solid ground and finds nothing. And in that moment of falling, many reach for the oldest answer in human history. There must be a first cause, something that started it all, something that exists outside the chain, something eternal, all-powerful, uncreated. They call it God, and look, that instinct is deeply human. It is not stupid. It is not primitive. It comes from the same place that drives every scientist, every philosopher, every curious child staring at the stars. The need to understand, the refusal to accept that the mystery just floats there unanswered. But here is where we need to slow down. Because the solution people have reached for this idea of a divine, eternal, uncreated creator, when you press on it gently, when you ask it the same questions it was supposed to answer, something very strange happens. It breaks. Here is the question nobody wants to ask out loud. If God created the universe and God has always existed, uncreated, eternal, needing no cause, then you have accepted the idea that something complex, something conscious, something with will and intention and power can exist without a cause. But if you've accepted that, why apply it only to God? Why not apply that same logic to the universe itself? This is not a rhetorical trick. This is a genuine logical demand. You cannot use "it always existed." It needs no cause as an explanation for a creator, while simultaneously insisting the universe could not have always existed and must have had a cause. That's not reasoning. That's special pleading. Accepting a rule for everything except the one thing you want to protect from it. And it gets even more interesting when you ask a second hidden question. What kind of thing is God exactly? Most theological descriptions tell us God is infinite, all-knowing, all-powerful, present everywhere, exists outside of time. Now, think carefully about what those words actually mean. To be all-knowing means to contain, in some sense, all information. To be all-powerful means to be capable of every possible action. To exist outside of time means to not be subject to the structure that gives cause and effect their meaning. These are not simple attributes. These are staggeringly complex ones. And here is what physics has taught us quietly and persistently over the last century. Complexity does not appear from nothing. Order does not precede disorder. Consciousness, as far as every shred of evidence tells us, emerges from simpler physical processes. It does not generate them. So when someone says God has always existed, they are asking you to believe that the most complex, most ordered, most information-rich entity imaginable just always was with no process, no emergence, no cause, and they're asking you to accept this while calling it an explanation. That is the hidden question, and it refuses to stay hidden. Now, to be fair, let's look at the strongest version of the argument for a creator, because ideas deserve to be understood at their best, not their worst. The argument goes like this, and philosophers call it the cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and that cause by definition must be something that did not begin, something eternal, something outside of space and time. It's clean, it's logical, and it has convinced some of the greatest minds in history. The physics beneath it is real enough. The universe, as far as our best measurements tell us, did have a beginning, or at least a boundary. Approximately 8 billion years ago, space itself was unimaginably dense and hot. Time as we measure, it may not have existed before that moment in any meaningful sense. The equations of general relativity, when run backwards, approach a singularity, a point where the laws of physics, as we know them, stop making predictions. So there is a genuine scientific mystery here. The universe does appear to have a starting point, and the question what caused that starting point is not answered by physics yet. That gap is real. Now into that gap, theology steps and says the cause was God, and on the surface, that sounds almost reasonable. You have a mystery, you have a proposed solution, fine, but here is where the surface explanation runs into trouble. When scientists encounter a gap in knowledge, they treat it as a gap, an open question, a place to investigate further, a signal that we need better tools and deeper thinking. What they do not do, what they cannot do and remain scientists, is fill the gap with an entity that is itself unexplained and then declare the mystery solved. Because filling a mystery with a bigger mystery is not an explanation. It is the appearance of one. The universe's origin is mysterious. We acknowledge that fully. But trading one mystery for an even more complex one, a conscious, all-powerful, eternal being, and calling it an answer, that is where the logic begins to quietly collapse. Here is where the real twist arrives, and it comes not from philosophy, but from mathematics and physics themselves. In 2012, physicist Lawrence Krauss published work building on decades of quantum cosmology that demonstrated something staggering. In quantum mechanics, nothing is not what we think it is. The classical idea of nothing, a pure void, an absolute absence of everything, turns out to be physically unstable. Quantum fields, even in their lowest possible energy state, fluctuate, they vibrate, they produce virtual particles that pop in and out of existence. The vacuum of space is not empty. It is a S-thing form of quantum activity. And crucially, quantum mechanics tells us that systems do not need a classical cause to transition from one state to another. At the quantum level, the very concept of cause dissolves at the edges. But here is the deeper twist, the one that rewires how you see the entire debate. When we talk about God as an explanation, we are importing a very specific assumption that the universe follows the logic of everyday causality, that things don't happen without reasons, without agents, without prior states. And that assumption works beautifully at human scales, billiard balls, falling apples, exploding stars. But when we reach the boundaries of the universe, the Planck scale, the quantum foam, the first fractions of the first second, that logic breaks down. Not metaphorically, mathematically. The equations stop producing clean causal chains. Time itself becomes uncertain. The word before may lose its meaning entirely. So when someone asks what caused the Big Bang, they are smuggling in a causal framework that may simply not apply at that scale. They are asking a question that sounds grammatically valid, but may be physically meaningless, like asking what is north of the North Pole. And this is the twist. The God hypothesis does not just fail to answer the question. It assumes the question makes sense when physics strongly suggests it may not. The universe may not need a cause, not because of philosophy, but because causality itself may be an emergent feature of the universe, not a rule that governs its birth. Let's step out of the equations for a moment and imagine something together. Imagine you are standing at the edge of all existence. Not in space, because space is part of the universe, and we are imagining the boundary of the universe itself. Not in time, because time, as physicists understand, it is a dimension woven into the fabric of space-time, and we are standing before that fabric was woven. You are in this thought experiment at the true edge, nothing behind you, the universe in front of you not yet born. Now ask yourself what is here. If you say God, then God is here. This eternal, conscious, all-powerful being existing in a timeless void. But immediately your mind runs into a wall. If there is no time, there is no sequence of events. If there is no sequence of events, there is no decision-making. If there is no decision-making, there is no intention. If there is no intention, there is no act of creation. A timeless being cannot decide to do something because deciding is a process. It has a before and an after. It requires time. So either God exists in time, in which case where did that time come from, or God exists outside of time, in which case God cannot act, cannot will, cannot create. You see the problem, now try the alternative. Imagine standing at that edge and finding not a conscious being, but something more like a quantum field. Something without personhood, without intention, without a plan. Something that simply is in a state of pure potential. And out of that potential, as quantum mechanics allows, a fluctuation occurs, not caused, not intended, not designed, just possible and therefore eventually inevitable. The universe does not need permission to begin. It does not need a creator to approve its existence. In a universe governed by quantum probability, if something can happen, if the laws of physics permit it, then across sufficient possibility space, it will happen. No mind required, no intention required, no first cause required in the theological sense. And here is the most vertiginous part of this thought experiment. You are made of particles that emerged from that fluctuation. Your consciousness, your ability to ask this question right now, is the universe becoming aware of itself, not through design, through physics. That is either the most beautiful accident in existence, or it is something we do not yet have words for. But notice it requires no author. Let's go deeper now. Let's actually look at what physics says about the layers of reality, from the smallest scales to the largest, and see what we find when we look for a creator's signature. At the subatomic level, particles do not behave like little billiard balls obeying clean rules. An electron does not have a definite position until you measure it. It exists in a superposition of states, a smear of probability across space. This is not a limitation of our instruments. This is the actual nature of the electron. The universe, at its most fundamental level, is probabilistic, not deterministic. This matters enormously because if the universe at its roots is probabilistic, if events happen without strict prior causes, then the entire logical structure of the God argument wobbles at its foundation. The argument says everything that begins to exist has a cause, but quantum mechanics says some things begin to exist without a cause in the classical sense. The argument was built for a Newtonian universe. We no longer live in one. Go one layer deeper, and you reach quantum field theory, the most precisely tested scientific theory in human history. In this framework, particles are not fundamental objects. They are excitations of underlying fields. The electron is a ripple in the electron field. The photon is a ripple in the electromagnetic field. These fields permeate all of space. They are not made of anything smaller. They simply are, and these fields in their ground state, their lowest possible energy, still fluctuate. They are never truly at rest. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle forbids perfect stillness. Energy and time are linked in such a way that a perfectly quiet vacuum is forbidden by mathematics. Now go to the largest scale. The observable universe contains roughly 2 trillion galaxies. Each galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars. The numbers are so large they stop being imaginable and become purely mathematical. And every single atom in every single star in every single galaxy is governed by the same quantum fields, the same physical constants, the same mathematical laws. Here is what is striking. Those laws are the same everywhere. The speed of light, the charge of an electron, the gravitational constant. These values do not change from one corner of the universe to another. They are perfectly uniform across 93 billion light-years. Why? We do not fully know, but here is what we do know. That uniformity does not point to a personal relational prayer answering God. It points to something far more abstract, more like mathematics itself having a kind of existence. And mathematics does not have intentions. Now, let's take the widest possible view. Let's zoom all the way out and then all the way in and see what the universe looks like from the extremes. Start at the largest scale we can imagine. Cosmologists now have strong theoretical reasons to believe our universe may be just one of an enormous, possibly infinite number of universes. The multiverse is not science fiction. It emerges naturally from several independent branches of physics. Inflationary cosmology, string theory's landscape, and the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics all point separately toward the same unsettling possibility. If the multiverse is real, then the question, why does this universe have the constants? It has a very different answer than God tuned them. The answer becomes because in an infinite array of universes, every possible combination of constants exists somewhere. We find ourselves in this one because this one permits the existence of beings capable of asking the question. This is called the anthropic principle, and it is not a circular argument. It is an observational filter. You cannot observe a universe that doesn't permit your existence. So naturally, any universe that contains observers will appear fine, tuned to permit observers. No tuner needed. Now zoom all the way in. Go smaller than atoms, smaller than protons, down to the level where space itself becomes grainy. The Planck scale 10 to the power of minus 35 meters. At this scale, the concepts of space and time themselves may not exist in any continuous sense. Some theories of quantum gravity suggest that space and time are emergent, that they arise from something more fundamental, the way temperature arises from the average motion of particles. If space and time are emergent, then asking what happened before the universe is like asking what is south of the South Pole. The question isn't unanswerable, it's malformed. It assumes a structure that doesn't exist at that level. And here, sandwiched between the cosmic enormity of the multiverse and the quantum graininess of spacetime itself, is where the God hypothesis runs out of room. There is no place left to stand, no gap left to fill. Every gap that once sheltered the idea of divine intervention has either been filled by physics or reframed as a question that may not require an answer in the traditional sense. The universe does not look like something that was made. It looks like something that is deeply, mathematically, inevitably. And that is far stranger and far more wonderful than anything a creation story has ever offered. So here is the big insight, the one that crystallizes everything. The concept of God, specifically the God of traditional theology, the personal creator, the intelligent designer, the being that exists outside time and space and wills the universe into existence, is not just unsupported by evidence. It is in a very precise sense logically self-defeating. Here is why any explanation worth the name must be simpler than the thing it explains. That is what explanation means. When Newton explained the motion of planets with a single equation, he replaced complicated observations with a simple underlying law. When Darwin explained the diversity of life with natural selection, he replaced the assumption of a designer with a simpler process. Good explanations reduce complexity, but introducing God increases complexity enormously. You begin with a mystery, the existence of the universe. You introduce an explanation, an eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful conscious being. But now you have a new mystery that is orders of magnitude more complex than the first. Where did this being's consciousness come from? How does it process infinite information? How does it act without time? How does it exist without space? You have not solved the problem of existence. You have doubled it and then hidden the second problem behind the word eternal. The philosopher David Hume noticed this centuries ago. The physicist Victor Stanger spent a career formalizing it. The biologist Richard Dawkins called it the central argument. Any creator capable of designing the universe would have to be at least as complex as the universe itself, and therefore requires just as much explanation. An unexplained explainer is not an explanation, and this is not a hostile observation. It is not an attack on faith or on the deeply human need to find meaning. It is simply the demand that we apply our reasoning consistently, that we hold every proposed explanation, including the most ancient and comforting ones, to the same standard. The universe is astonishing. Its existence is mysterious. Its laws are breathtaking in their elegance. But the appropriate response to a mystery is not to conjure a bigger mystery and call it solved. The appropriate response is wonder and work. But let's sit with something for a moment before we reach the end, because this conversation is not just about logic. It is about what it means to be a conscious creature in an enormous, indifferent, mathematically governed universe. There is a certain kind of loneliness in the universe that physics describes. A universe with no author, no plan, no cosmic purpose written into its equations. A universe where you are a temporary arrangement of atoms that will one day disperse back into the void from which they came. That is a hard thing to hold, and perhaps that is exactly why the God hypothesis has persisted across every culture in every century. Not because it is logically sound, but because it is emotionally necessary. It makes the loneliness bearable. It gives the suffering meaning. It offers the terrifying impermanence of life a frame, a story within which it makes sense. These are not small things. These are the things that hold civilizations together. But here is what philosophy has quietly whispered for centuries, and what science now shouts. You can have the wonder without the fiction. You can have the awe without the author. You can stand under the night sky and feel the full weight of existence not diminished because it is purposeless, but amplified because it is real. A sunset is not less beautiful because it is explained by the scattering of light. A human life is not less meaningful because it was not designed. Love is not less real because it emerged from neurons rather than divine commandment. The universe does not need to be created to be extraordinary. It just needs to be. And when you truly absorb that, when you let the reality of it settle fully into your bones, you realize something remarkable. The universe, in producing you, produced something capable of understanding it. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. That is not a small miracle. Even if no miracles exist, here is where I want to leave you. Every atom in your body was forged inside a star. The carbon in your cells, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, every single one of these atoms was cooked in stellar fusion over billions of years and scattered across space when those stars exploded. You are in the most literal sense made of dead stars, and those stars were made of hydrogen. And that hydrogen was made in the first 3 minutes after the beginning of the universe, when the energy density was so high that protons fused spontaneously in the expanding fireball. And that fireball emerged from what? A quantum fluctuation, a probabilistic event at the boundary of time, something without intention, without consciousness, without design. And from that, nothing that was not quite nothing. Through 8 billion years of physics came hydrogen, then stars, then heavier elements, then planets, then chemistry, then life, then neurons, then language, then the question you are asking right now, where did all of this come from? The universe made you, and then through you it asked about itself. You are not separate from the universe looking at it from outside. You are the universe folded back upon itself, achieving self-awareness for a brief, impossible moment. The cosmos peering at its own reflection in the mirror of a human mind. There is no God in the equations, no signature in the constants, no author in the margins. But there is something vast and intricate and almost incomprehensibly beautiful, a mathematical structure of such depth and elegance that entire human lifetimes are not enough to explore its edges. Call it what you want, but do not diminish it by making it simple. Do not replace the genuine, dizzying, magnificent mystery of existence with a word. Sit with the mystery. It is the most honest thing you can.